Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Today we're going to talk, we're talking about at least two interesting herbs, maybe three. I'm not sure exactly what time will permit. And the first, if you've been listening to the show for any amount of time, you know I'm just a huge fan of poke, Phytolacca americana. It's one of my favorite medicinal herbs. This is from my book, the Spring Foraging Cookbook. And so we'll talk some about the medicinal uses. I've done a whole show on the medicinal uses of poke. So we'll cover that kind of briefly, and then we'll talk about how to cook it, because it's really one of my favorite wild edibles. I mean, it's definitely in my top 5. It's one I look forward to every single spring, and really just one of my favorites. And it's such an American plant. I mean, it's just so intertwined with the history of early America and the Native Americans and all that, and the South in particular. So we'll get into that, and definitely Baccharis. Baccharis is sometimes called bush groundsel, but there are a couple plants that go by that name. It's an herb with one of my favorite names, actually. One of the common names is mule's fat. Why in the world would you name a plant mule's fat? I have no idea. But it's a really interesting and very useful medicinal herb, and that's coming from my book, The Medicinal Shrubs and Woody Vines. If time permits, I'll also cover barberry. Barberry, it just has so many uses, whether it's Asian barberry that's often planted as an ornamental, or our own native Oregon grape. Really just one of the essential herbs, in my opinion. Hopefully I'll have time to do all three. If not, I'll hold barberry for next week. But first, with all that's going on, I guess it's going to be a little bit of a rant, but I think it'll give you some really good insight. I mean, we've seen here in North Carolina the just horrible, pathetic response by FEMA. In many cases, people were getting more help and were better off before FEMA ever came in, supposedly to help. Okay, you've seen what's happening in California with the wildfires, and you're sitting there thinking, they knew this was coming. They knew this was going to happen, and for years. And I'm a permaculture guy. I've got at least 2 friends. Well, one's a real friend. The other one I've just had some brief contact with. Jeff Lawton, I don't know him, but we've communicated. But I know Matt Powers, he's great. And there's at least 2 that I know of who have presented really comprehensive, super environmentally friendly. I mean, permaculture is like the ultimate environmentalist practice to basically fireproof California. And they presented them, and they did, I think with Lawton, I mean, he was even commissioned to do this big study. And it's like, they go in, they say, hey, here's what you need to do. And they're just like, okay, thanks. And nothing ever happens, right? President Trump said, you've got to clean up this underbrush. It's just a tinderbox. They're like, yeah, we're not listening to you. I guess there have been two. There was one in 2000 and another one just recently, like in the last year. Propositions voted on by the voters of California to increase water storage for the express purpose of fighting these wildfires, and it never happened. They either didn't build the reservoirs, or never finished them, or never filled them. And yeah, that's just one example. That's two examples, but we're talking about sort of natural disasters. Okay. And of course, some of those fires were probably set by arsonists. They did catch one guy trying to set a fire in a California neighborhood, and with a plumber's torch apparently, and arrested him. So we don't know if it's a natural disaster or man-caused in that case, but certainly exacerbated by the incredible Santa Ana winds. Everybody knew this was going to happen, and it's like nobody was prepared for it. And you're sitting there thinking, why? I mean, it's one thing in the mountains of North Carolina, you don't think a hurricane's going to come, and in the course of like 12 hours, rain so heavily that little creeks rise, I guess I should say, from 8 to 30 feet and wipe out everything in their path. You can predict coastal hurricanes, but still, there's at least the response is pretty bad. Or you might be sitting there wondering, why in the world would you put district attorneys in places in major American cities that won't prosecute violent criminals and seem to be exacerbating the crime? Or why, if you have an extensive welfare system, would you bring in purposefully so many illegal immigrants that are immediately going to go on welfare, food stamps, housing subsidies, subsidies for cell phones and automobiles, free education, free health care, etc., knowing that you don't have the tax revenue to pay for it? Why would you keep pumping them in there? And at some point, I know everybody's asking this question. Everybody I've talked to, and I'm talking to people on different sides of the political aisles. I'll try to keep this as non-political as can be. Why are you allowing these problems to be, they're going to happen, and you're setting everybody up for failure and then unable to do anything about it in the nation that spends more by far on, through tax dollars and just printing money at the Federal Reserve on supposedly trying to prevent or solve these issues? Why is the system set up to fail, essentially? And a friend of mine the other day, actually an herbalist, she's up in Michigan, her name's Domino, I know her on Twitter, she had this wonderful phrase. She called it weaponized incompetence. And I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, there's actually something to that. And I don't mean that it's intentional that these individuals are setting people up for these horrible conditions, but there's a level of incompetence that is actually almost turned against the problems they're trying to solve, or the people that are funding their positions. There's another, I cannot remember the name of this journalist. He's done a big piece. You can look it up. It's just sometime within the last year or two. The failure of complex systems, and it's very scholarly and really interesting. I used to work in politics, and from my teens to around 30, I collected and read just about every political book and article I could find, and I mean on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the spectrum. I've got shelves full of William F. Buckley and Barry Goldwater and George Will back when he was a conservative. So many. David Horowitz, he wrote some really good books, so it'll give you a lot of insight into this, because he was an actual diehard communist who became a conservative. Same with Dr. Michael Savage. You may think some of these guys are kind of fringe, but they, again, Dr. Savage is an incredibly intelligent man who was once on the left and moved to the right, and then he talks about, certain things. One of the concepts that was presented in the 60s, I guess, it's about Saul Alinsky period. That's another one you need to read if you want to understand the left. He was, I guess, Hillary Clinton's professor, and the guy that inspired her and the professors for Barack Obama and so many. He wrote the Rules for Radicals, dedicated the book to Satan. So, it kind of tells you where he's coming from. Okay. But along that time, and I think these may have been either two of his contemporaries or students, I cannot remember. There were two professors named Cloward and Piven, and this is called the Cloward-Piven strategy. And it was widely written about in the 60s, well, more 70s and early 80s. And you may find this hard to believe, but these two, diehard communist professors said the way to destroy America was to overwhelm the system. Put so many people on welfare that welfare could no longer afford, and it would collapse. Expand Social Security and everything to the point that Social Security would run out of money. Put in DAs that wouldn't prosecute crime so that the crime in the major cities became to the point that people felt they could not rely on the police and the government to help them. That's actually the Cloward and Piven strategy, and it sounds purely evil, and it is. But what I want to tell you in thinking this through and this concept of weaponized incompetence, since Jimmy Carter federalized public education, America's test scores have gone from like the top to the bottom. I mean, we are now worse test scores than third world countries and spending about 10 times more per student than any nation on earth. Here in North Carolina, more than 50% of children, adults, I guess, graduate high school functionally illiterate and unable to do basic math. In Chicago, for instance, in the Chicago public school system, which is one of the most expensive, there's more money spent per student in the Chicago public school system than just about anywhere on earth. And I believe it's over 60% are illiterate and unable to do basic math. Meanwhile, we have universities that are putting people, $50,000 and $100,000 into debt for essentially worthless degrees, useless degrees that are of no good. But in the meantime, we've come up with this idea of the credentialed class. In other words, if someone says something, if someone states something, they have no credibility unless they have a certain degree or title by their name. Well, we saw this a lot during COVID. We saw people, doctors and such, saying really ridiculous things that we knew were not true. Fauci now says that, he just made up the rule of everybody stay 6 feet apart. He just made it up. He had no basis for it. We know that cloth masks don't prevent the spread of a virus. It can prevent the saliva coming out of your mouth if you cough or sneeze, but viruses are microscopic particles, and to get through the weave of a simple cloth mask is like you walking through not just a doorway, but like an open garage door. There was one lady that this is common sense, right? She said, I remember she was being interviewed on television back in the beginning of COVID, and she said, I don't see the point of a mask. They said, why not? And she said, well, if your pants don't keep your farts in, how's a mask going to keep the virus in? And that's absolutely true. You're talking, if it can't keep, bacteria and gases in, how can it keep microscopic viruses in? But we were all forced to wear masks. So in many cases, we've seen that the credentialed classes that have all this authority and can actually enforce things and really run your lives have no idea what they're doing. Well, when you start by essentially destroying the education system and then putting all that emphasis on that degree or on that title or the title of an elected official without really paying attention to, does this person actually have any sense? Do they actually know what they're talking about? That is Cloward and Piven, and that's the result of their very purposeful and highly embraced strategy to destroy the system. So now you add into that like DEI and all that, where it doesn't really matter if you can do the job. All it matters is the color of your skin or your sexual identity. Did you happen to see that congressional hearing with the head of the Secret Service who was absolutely, utterly incompetent trying to answer questions over, how they allowed a shooter to get on a roof in front of everyone and take a shot at President Trump and nearly kill him. And everybody in the crowd is like pointing and screaming, look, there's a shooter on the roof. And they're just like wandering around with their heads up their butts. Totally unqualified for those positions. Only there because of gender, race, sexual identity, or credentialism. And credentialism can be your college degree, or in a bureaucracy, it can be how you work yourself up and you get one more title and one more title. I mean, in government, the best way to get ahead is to fail miserably. You can then say, oh, well, if we just had more money and I just had more authority, everything would have gone a lot better. So, of course, the government then gives them more money and more authority. And you literally have career bureaucrats that have failed at every stage of their career and gotten promotions and raises from day one to the time they retire. And, of course, when it comes to baby boomers, they will not retire. They are their entire identity, because they walked away from their family farms and neighborhoods and traditions and all that. Their entire identity, and usually their religions as well, and 2 or 3 divorces, and not really that into their children's lives oftentimes. I'm not trying to make too broad a generalization, but you kind of get the idea of these people who get into government and then will not let hold of power. They will not let go of power, no matter what. They will die in office. Okay, you look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you look at John McCain, you look at Nancy Pelosi. Their identity is so wrapped up. Joe Biden, obviously. Their identity is so wrapped up in that title and that power that no matter how unable to do the job they are. I mean, just in the past few months, just from like Barbara Boxer to Mitch McConnell. Well, Mitch is frozen up several times. It's almost like he's having a mini stroke on camera. I think Boxer, she couldn't even find her office, her bathroom, her get to the hall to vote. Her staff was literally like leading her along and telling her how to vote. I mean, they won't give it up, though. They will not let go of power. That is the end result of Cloward and Piven, which leads to a credentialed class that is absolutely unable to do the job for which they're hired to, for which they're elected, for which they're given tremendous authority over the lives of regular people who aren't in that class. And we even saw it in the medical profession when doctors would come out and say, I really have concerns about the COVID vaccination. It hasn't been properly tested. It may be dangerous. And they would be stripped of their credentials and lose their positions in hospitals. And ditto within the legal profession. We see people disbarred over their politics. It's, in a way, what my friend said, weaponized incompetence is very valid. Now, it's not that individual, like that pathetic fire chief or that pathetic mayor out there in California, who obviously shouldn't be in those positions if competency and intelligence actually mattered, the ability to do the job. I'm not saying they have bad intent. They may have the best intent in the world, but they're not bright enough or capable enough or strong enough or whatever it is to do the job. That's where weaponized incompetence comes in. It's not the individual necessarily. Now, in some cases, it may well be. I mean, gosh, a lot of the stuff that happened during COVID seemed to be very purposeful to hurt people. I mean, like when the truckers were protesting and they started, seizing their bank accounts and such, that was obviously very vindictive and very purposeful. Or in New York, all the people they shoved into nursing homes, knowing they were more likely to die there than otherwise. I mean, that does seem to have actually been beyond incompetence, and I'm glad there is starting to be some accountability for this. But it may be the result of that Cloward-Piven strategy that started around 1972 or so, and was really introduced into the system beginning at the college level. But what they also did encourage people to do was to get into elected office at the local level, the state level, starting at like dog catcher and working your way up to the Senate and the presidency. So, What does all this mean for us? Well, I can tell you in my own life, I now do every single thing I can not to have to go to a doctor. That's how this is relevant to an herbal medicine podcast. As I have mentioned many times over the last at least 30 years, every single member of my family who's died has died due to medical error, malpractice, or overprescription, conflicting prescriptions, etc. I mean, my grandmother poisoned to death because two doctors prescribed her two different medications and didn't check the chart, and the nurse said take the medicine. She took it and she died. Okay, two conflicting medications. An uncle who complained about a nurse stealing his pain medication, so he was put in a room with an adjoining bathroom with someone who had an antibiotic resistant infection, and he quickly died. Um, Another uncle, great uncle, who went in for prostate surgery, and the drunken surgeon cut his artery and he bled out on the table. Another uncle who was diagnosed with diabetes turned out to be fatty liver disease, and then they basically starved him to death. Another uncle who went in for a procedure, had a spinal tap, and it was botched, and he was paralyzed, and eventually his lungs shut down. I could go on and on. I had my own personal experience, immediate family, and that shouldn't surprise you because the leading cause of death in America is not heart attack, is not cancer, is not diabetes, etc. It is medical error, malpractice, abuse, and overprescription. That means a doctor is more likely to kill you than a bank robber. No, I'll just say than a thug, okay? Because a bank robber, it's a little more niche, right? I mean, he actually walks in thinking, I'm going to shoot somebody. But a doctor is more likely to kill you than a mugger, okay? A mugger really probably just wants to take your wallet and not get charged with murder. That means a doctor is more likely to kill you than a mugger. So I haven't been to a doctor in at least 20 years. Of course, again, there's another reason for that. I had pretty good insurance, medical insurance, as a self-employed person until Obamacare passed. Once again, the credentialed class, saying we're going to fix the problem of insurance, went in and screwed everything up. And my insurance rates, I mean, they went up a double, triple. I was seeing, I mean, rates going up, deductibles going up, premiums going up. And that's it. I said, well, forget it. I'm just going to take care of myself with herbal medicine. I haven't had insurance since Obamacare passed. I figure, I keep a bit in savings. If I have to go to a doctor, I'll walk in and pay cash. Well, that sounds like a really good plan, except, I can tell you another relative of mine just needed a basic cataract surgery and went into the local clinic, which is actually really well thought of in North Carolina, and said, I want to pay cash. And they said, we don't accept cash. And she said, why not? And they said to her, well, because of the cost of filing insurance and Medicare and Medicaid regulations, we charge this amount. If we take off the cost of insurance, essentially, we would have to charge someone who paid cash a lesser amount. And we can't do that anymore because the government considers it to be fraud, because we're charging one person a different price than another person. And that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, and I don't think they were right on that, because she went to another clinic and they said, yeah, we're glad to take cash. Come on in. And they did do the procedure for like half the amount that the other clinic would have done it for, because they didn't have to file all that paperwork, and they're glad to have cash in hand, money in the bank. Well, you see how the credentialed class keeps screwing things up. So, yeah, I've written a lot of books for preppers. I've written a lot of books for homesteaders. Bottom line is, permaculture principles, remember, have 3 to 5 sources of water on your property. You may not be able to do anything in 100-mile-per-hour winds with a raging wildfire coming at you. Now, permaculture was actually designed in Australia, where they have bad wildfires. So there are like berms and swales and all these different things you can do to slow the fire. Again, with winds like that, I don't know that you can do that, just like you can't prevent a hurricane coming in like it did in North Carolina. But, you can look at trying to fireproof your property. There's huge, vast information. Go to Jeff Lawton. Look at the old Bill Mollison stuff. They really focused on wildfires. You can look at trying to help your property with drainage in case of flooding and where you position your home. You know, it may be too late now for a lot of people, but I guarantee a lot of these people here in North Carolina, when they rebuild, they're not going to be as close to that river as they were last time, if they get to rebuild. I mean, another example of, I'll just call it that, weaponized incompetence. In one of those towns, I can't remember if it was Chimney Rock, Flat Rock, one of those out there, Lake Lure area, where the whole town was just washed away. A bunch of Amish came in and built everybody tiny houses. And they, these were quality homes. If you were, single or maybe, just two people family, it was, really enough space for you. The local government said, and they were built, they were ready to go, people were ready to move in, and the local government said, no, they don't fit our zoning codes. They don't fit our zoning codes. Now that, to the best of my knowledge, they fought that, and the local government finally said, okay, yeah, you can use them. But there again, credentialed class preventing people from getting into these houses before winter. They slowed things down ridiculously, and there are still people in North Carolina freezing in tents in the dead of winter. That's how much FEMA is helping us. So what's the bottom line? Most times, don't blame the individual. It's really easy to assign intent to a person. Now, sometimes you may be right, but even if you are, it really doesn't matter. Whether it's banking, I'll give you another example. Bank. During COVID, they shut down the lobby, and they dropped back on staff, and they said, we're doing, just drive-through only, or you can use the ATM. Well, following COVID, they reduced the staff down to only one teller and two what they call personal bankers. Those are the people that help you get mortgages and such as that. One teller. And then they shut down the drive-through and made everybody come in. So if you're sick or you've got a broken leg, you have to get out of your car and walk in. You can't go through the drive-through anymore. Now, this is a very busy bank. This is not the one in my little hometown. This is one in a much larger town that I spent a lot of time in, and I had to really change a lot. During the hurricane, banks, post offices, everything where I was wiped away, essentially shut down for weeks. So I transferred everything over to this much bigger bank in a bigger town. A little inconvenient, but I could actually go speak with a person and get this done. Well, over the following months, they started firing staff, and now they had that one teller is a blithering idiot who cannot do anything for you other than sometimes won't even take your deposit. I mean, that's how dumb this lady is. She said, well, we have this regulation, and I'm like, okay, here's my driver's license. I'll show you any no, I need to send a PIN code to your phone. I don't have my phone on me. Well, I'm sorry, I can't take your deposit. What would happen if I didn't have a cell phone? In the mountains where I live, I get horrible cell coverage. I don't often carry a phone. And following the hurricane, until Musk brought up Starlink, there was no internet whatsoever to be had. There was no cell phone coverage whatsoever to be had. So in weaponized incompetence, I'm sure following COVID, this large banking chain, one of the biggest in the country, thought, wow, we saved a lot of money by getting rid of a lot of staff and limiting our tellers, right? And then they thought, well, we'll just keep paring it down, and then we'll put an idiot in there, so everybody's forced to do other banking online or use the ATM. Do I get mad at the idiot in the bank? Well, I had some choice words the last time I spoke with her, but then I just realized what was going on, and I figure I've got to figure out a way to work around everything and do everything myself, because I cannot count on the person who has this role to actually do their job. And that's what we're seeing in education, healthcare, insurance, banking, every single level of government, from your home inspector to your tax evaluator to your governor, and everybody, every single person. And it started, I believe, with Cloward-Piven. And if you want to look into that, at least it'll give you some answers. But that doesn't solve the problem. The problem is solved by learning to do as much as possible for yourself. How many times do I say I only cook at home now? I don't eat in restaurants except every now and then I might pick up a burger or a pizza somewhere. I don't go in to sit down in restaurants anymore. Why? Because most of the independent family-owned chains are gone. They're all like, corporate-owned. I mean, independent restaurants, they're now like corporate-owned chains. The food's all coming in frozen. It's coming from Cisco and U.S. Foods. Your so-called chef is basically the microwaver in chief. I mean, the food is lousy and it's not worth paying for anymore. And now you see these signs, if you don't tip 30%, please don't eat here. No, I'm not going to tip 30% for somebody to bring me a plate of food and a beer. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you're getting, every day the service is getting worse. Every day the competency is getting worse in every aspect of our society. You don't believe me? Go to Walmart or something and try to pay the cashier with paper dollars and change and see them try to do math. Forget it, right? It's ridiculous. Yeah. So whether it's herbal medicine, whether it's growing as much as your own food as possible, whether it's, looking into how can I help protect my house from fires and storms and such as that, resiliency is based on redundancy. Have at least 3 ways to solve every aspect of every problem in your life. Those are permaculture principles. My book, Herbal Medicine for Preppers, Homesteaders, and Permaculture People, is a great place to start. My book, Herb Gardening for Preppers, Homesteaders, and Permaculture People, great place to start. Matt Power's courses are fantastic. He does them online. Jeff Lawton is phenomenal. There's so many really good ones. Bill Mollison was a real jerk, but a brilliant guy. I have all but one of his books, actually. No, all but 2 of his books. One's out of print. But anyway, you can find videos of him on YouTube. I think you can still find full permaculture courses that he recorded that are available online from certain places. My old friend Clint Locklear, I think he went by Permaculture Realist. He did a series of permaculture courses on YouTube for free. Jack Spirko from the Survival Podcast. And it's not just gardening. I want to make it very clear. It is not just gardening. It's figuring out how to build in those layers of resiliency in every aspect of your life so that you're not dependent on a government official or an idiot with a title or a degree. And for me, of course, the biggest part of that is herbal medicine because, I've just told you my experience. You want to go even further with that? When I was, just before I turned 5, I developed really bad asthma. It's hereditary. And I was in and out of hospitals most of my childhood on prescription medications. The main prescription medications they gave me in my teens are actually the precursors for making methamphetamine. They're now illegal. And when I was, I went through my teens like totally disconnected from everything, unable to concentrate, felt like there was like a fishbowl over my head. Could not run because I was always out of breath, so sports were not fun. And of course, in public school, you're forced to participate. And eventually I had basically a minor heart attack from the medication I was put on. That was my biggest impetus in my late teens, the biggest motivation, the big kick in the butt I needed to learn to use herbs for my asthma. And I haven't gone back to prescription medication since. So, I'm just telling you, don't count on, forget about the credentialed class. And everything's moving in that direction. Even look at auto mechanics. The vehicles have become more computerized and everything. They've become a specialized profession. Everything from plumbers to electricians have become very specialized. Learn to do as much as you can yourself or make friends with, the good old boy down the street that probably dropped out of high school but knows how to fix a car or swing a hammer. Become very good friends with that person. That's another aspect of permaculture, is forming a community of people with skills that will, network and help each other. And you're also, a big aspect of permaculture is paying for people's time and work. And you can work out a barter system or a cash system and really insulate yourself from a lot of stuff that can happen. I mean, like I said, the truckers, when they protested, they seized their bank accounts. They couldn't get money out of their bank to pay their electric bill or put food on the table because they dared question the government. Insulate yourself by building in systems of redundancy, working up that network, and becoming as self-reliant as you can, not in a doomsday prepper mindset. I mean, I don't get into that kind of stuff, but in a practical, common sense homesteading environment, really the way our grandparents and great-grandparents used to do it. And, a lot of this problem would be solved if people would get married, stay married, have kids, stay in the same community, and, build communities like our grandparents and great-grandparents used to have. That was another aspect of that whole Cloward-Piven and baby boomer mindset of go to college, move to another state, break the family apart, break the communities apart. Then government has to come in and take over those roles. They have to raise your kids and discipline your kids and do everything that a community used to do, from building roads to, everything, right? Communities used to do that for themselves. Then everybody gets dependent on government. Then it's real easy to overwhelm the system and everything falls apart. Why would you want everything to fall apart? Well, Cloward-Piven were very adamant that they hated America and wanted it destroyed. They wanted a new communist government put in place. And in a communist government, everybody's dependent on the government for everything and limited by the government in all ways. You want to see the result of that? Get the Black Book of Communism. You'll see 100 to 200 million people killed by their own governments in the name of creating that great communist utopia. It never works. It never will work. It's purely evil and atheistic to its core. And that's why Saul Alinsky dedicated his book to Satan, whom he called the first rebel. They never tried to hide who they were. They never tried to hide it, except every 4 years when somebody's trying to get elected, and then everybody becomes real nice and moderate, right? Yeah. All right, so now let's get on to the plants. And as I said, we're starting with one of my absolute favorites, Phytolacca, poke. And this native edible is, the medicinal use is a matter of some controversy. For centuries, poke salad, and that is spelled S-A-L-A-T, it's an old English term for edible greens, and sometimes roots, and it derives from an ancient Latin term that was used in Rome, doesn't really matter, but it is spelled S-A-L-A-T. Well, it was one of the most beloved wild edibles among both Native Americans and early Americans of European descent, and it remained popular in the Appalachians into my childhood. It's still beloved by the more traditional folks and foragers. It does have some toxicity, and our government no longer allows it to be sold as food. It used to be. Even when I was a kid, you could buy canned poke shoots. Well, not anymore because the government knows best. More than likely, another example, you talk to your county extension service or your master gardener, and the only advice they're going to tell you is how to eradicate this so-called weed. Well, first of all, it's a native plant, so by definition, it's not a weed. Most modern foraging and herbal books do discourage people from using poke for reasons I consider much less than valid. Every year kids are more than likely rushed to the hospital after being seen eating pokeberries. However, I can find no evidence of any fatalities due to eating a few berries. They are certainly toxic, but they induce nausea, and people who eat them generally throw them up, usually before the body absorbs enough toxicity to cause harm. And it would probably surprise many to know that in early America, they learned from the Cherokee how to make pokeberry wine, which was taken in small amounts for arthritis, and a lot of old-timers still swear by it. As an herbalist, I use poke for its strong lymphatic, diaphoretic, and antiviral properties. In other words, it purges the lymph system, it helps reduce fever, and it has antiviral properties. That's actually how I got over COVID. It wouldn't quit. It kept lingering. It kept lingering. I ate a little bit of poke root, which, is the most toxic part of the plant. Suddenly my fever broke, I sweat, and I felt better, and I wasn't sick after that. The root is the most toxic part of the plant, and a large dose could certainly prove fatal. Absolutely. Some sources, usually looking at the tinctured root, which is pretty strong, very concentrated, say that a half ounce of the tinctured root would be dangerous. Others say an ounce. Frankly, I don't know any knowledgeable herbalist that would use a dose anywhere near as high. Just a few drops of poke tincture is what's usually used. I didn't actually use tincture. I took a bite of a fresh root, which, any book's going to tell you would kill you. It didn't hurt me in the least, but that's me. I've been eating poke all my life, and I use it medicinally, and, I probably built up a tolerance. So if you had never used it before, hey, it could hurt you. I'm not going to say it couldn't. Most foraging books recommend using the small, tender, early spring shoots and tender spring leaves before any of the purple color of the stalk is moved to the leaves. They then recommend boiling them in 2 to 3 changes of water before cooking in fat. Okay, officially, I'm going to give you that advice because I'm not going to disagree with the experts. I don't want to get sued, right? So do what the experts tell you, but that's not what I do. Like I said, I have an unproven theory that people build up a tolerance to the toxicity. I actually eat the leaves raw in early spring, which all the books tell you will kill you. But, I grab a handful and eat them. They taste sort of like fresh peas with a little interesting tanginess to them. I never boil them before just cooking them in fat and eat them like a pot herb. I'm not unique in this regard. I've spoken with several experienced foragers and old mountain folks who do the same. But the official advice is boil them in 3 changes of water, then fry them in fat and serve them with vinegar, however you like, right? A friend of mine who was inexperienced with poke mistook the word salad for salad, and her first experience with the leaves was to eat a large bowl of fresh, raw leaves. Bad idea. Even I only eat just a few at a time. She called poison control, though, and they told her not to worry because they said she'd soon vomit and or have diarrhea and be just fine. She did, and obviously she developed an aversion to poke and will not eat it to this day. But even in that case, it was not really harmful. Like I said, poke is definitely in my top 5 wild edible plants. It's one of our first spring vegetables. And I actually grow a few plants in pots so I can have poke leaves earlier in the season. You can bring them in, winter them, I cook the young shoots just like asparagus using the steam sauteed method I've described so many times. Just, wash them, put them in a pan with a little water and oil, a little salt. Put the lid on until they come up to a simmer, take the lid off, let the water boil off, and then just saute them in oil. And it's fantastic. For the greens, I just wash them and cook them in pork fat, bacon fat, lard, whatever I've got. Fatback, always a good choice. I cook them down well, but not so much as dandelion greens because they're much more tender, and just serve them with hot pepper vinegar. For salad, I will add a few tender leaves, raw, to a mix of other spring greens. I'm not going to use just a pinch, 4 or 5 little leaves. Always look, most books will tell you that once the purple from the stem has spread into the leaf, that's the toxicity and don't eat them. As long as that purple's not really in the leaf, I don't think there's any problem. But I don't really even pay attention to that. I just grab a few and eat them. And I've never gotten sick, but like I said, I don't eat a ton of them either. Traditionally, mountain people have considered poke to be a blood cleanser. That's not a term that herbalists really use anymore, but I think it makes sense. A few servings were believed to be necessary for the immune system and help restore vitality after long winters of eating mostly dry beans, salted meat, sauerkraut, and potatoes. So it gave you some vitamin C, and it got, a little fiber and kind of got you back into health after a long, cold winter. These old ways helped my great-grandparents to live to an average of 100 years, and all but one at least to their mid-90s. So while I have no proof that spring tonics such as poke, ramps, dandelions, or other greens contributed to this, I have no reason to doubt it either. My grandparents who didn't eat such things, my grandmother did not eat wild poke or anything like that. In fact, she was very afraid of it for some reason. They didn't live anywhere near as long. They started dying in their 70s and 80s. So I do believe in wild foods and a great diversity of foods to be essential for nutrition, and besides, they're delicious. got to reference you to my disclaimer, though. Use caution. Every so-called official source on foraging states that no part of poke should ever be eaten raw or cooked when mature, for that matter. Only early spring greens and shoots, and they advocate that at least 2 changes of boiling water and boiling for 16 to 30 minutes, which will reduce them to basically mush. Well, so I'm going to give you that advice even if I don't follow it myself, and I certainly do not. But you're in charge. You make your own decisions. It's another thing you have to remember in this era of credentialed classes. You still have the right to make your own decisions. When we cede that, we've ceded all liberty. Now, in the medicinal herb from the Medicinal Shrubs and Vines book, Baccharis. And I probably won't have time to get into barberry. It really does deserve its own show anyway, so I'll save that one for next week. I have done a show on Oregon grape before, so if you're curious, just go back through the archives and find that. So I'm not holding out on you. I'm just running out of time. So Baccharis, at least 4 varieties have been documented in herbal medicine. Baccharis halimifolia. That's a hard one to say. Halimifolia. That's bush groundsel. Baccharis patagonica, Baccharis pilularis, and dwarf chapel broom, also known as mule's fat. I love that name. There are 3 native to my region, and that's Baccharis angustifolia, Baccharis glomerifolia, and Baccharis hamilifolia, also bush groundsel. And that's the one really with the most documented medicinal use. Going back 2,000 some years, Dioscorides said, Baccharis is an herb with many stalks and a sweet scent. It is used to make wreaths for the head. The leaves are sharp, in size between violet and verbascum. I won't get into the whole description. You can just Google it to get a good picture of it. Flowers are purple color, whitish, sweet smelling. It really is a very nice plant, actually. And he mentioned that it smells similar to cinnamon. I really hadn't associated the two. Next time I find some in flower, I'll have to check that out. He says it loves rough, dry places, and it does. It does not like wet feet, as best I can tell. Boiled in water, the root helps with convulsions, hernia, falls from on high, hard breathing, obstinate coughs, and painful urination. It expels the menstrual flow and is usually given with wine to those bitten by snakes. And he does give some use for pregnant women, and I think it's far too dangerous. I'm not going to even mention what that is. He said it is good in scented powders having a fragrant smell. The leaves are astringent and are applied to help headaches, inflammation of the eyes, ulcers of the eyes as they begin, breast inflamed from childbearing, and erysipelas, which is a streptococcal skin infection. And the smell is sleep-inducing, which that's very interesting. I keep thinking at some point I'm going to set up this little area, maybe beside a little koi pond or something in the yard, and probably put bullfrogs in it because I'd much rather eat frog legs than raise koi. But put a bunch of plants around there that help relax, like maybe a hops vine, some lavender, passion flower. Maybe Baccharis would be a good option to include in there. Things just, lay in the hammock and help you relax and go to sleep. I think that would be really nice on a hot summer afternoon. Like I said, bush groundsel is the most documented variety. According to Resources of Southern Fields and Forests, it was also called consumption weed or sea myrtle. Now, there are other plants that go by those same common names, but under Baccharis hamifolia, bush groundsel, or as they call it, consumption weed, it was also called sea myrtle because it grew along the coast. And he found in St. John's, that's near Charleston. It's now just called John's Island, but used to be called St. John's, and up in New Bern, North Carolina, and all the way down to Florida in October. He said the plant is of undoubted value and of very general use in popular practice in South Carolina as a palliative and emulsant in consumption and cough. I have frequently seen it used with advantage and have often heard of those employing it confess the benefit derived from it. A strong decoction of the root may be drank several times a day. It is slightly bitter and mucilaginous in taste. No analysis has yet been made, so far as I can learn. A doctor named Sheckett states that the bark is said to exude a gum so much resembling honey as to attract bees in great numbers. This, like many other of our indigenous plants, possessed of unequivocal utility. is unnoticed in the dispensatories and other works. So, even though it had ancient use by the 1860s, it wasn't being used in modern herbal medicine or modern medicine, and I really don't have any other entries on this very interesting and useful plant. But as I said, I have a ton on barberry, so we will kick that one off next week. Y'all stay safe. Remember, with the inauguration coming up in about a week, there's a big risk of terrorist attacks. You know, the FBI can put spies in Catholic churches and arrest people for praying the rosary outside of abortion clinics and do all kinds of stuff like that, but they just can't seem to catch terrorists before they kill people. Once again, they're credentialed classes. So, y'all, be careful, be safe. I will say once again, as I did last week, I would avoid crowds right now. I know there's a lot of great college football and all that going on. I don't think it's safe. My personal advice is to avoid crowds right now. Take it with a grain of salt. Take it for what it is. But I I don't count on the people who are supposed to be keeping us safe to keep us safe, and there are a whole lot of people out there that want to hurt us right now. And it's not just true in America. There's a lot going on in Europe. There's a lot going on in Australia. There's just a really tense and dangerous time right now. And do think about your personal safety and security and that of your family and your friends and your neighbors. Put that at the first and foremost in some of the things you think about in a day, and keep your eye out for anything that looks strange, that looks a little off. So anyway, y'all, have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.